there were 356 cases of community transmission in New South Wales, and at this stage we understand around a third of them had some exposure in the community during that time.
In the regions, no new cases for locked down Tamworth, Armidale or Byron Bay. But the Hunter outbreak grew by 13 cases, with multiple new exposure sites added in Newcastle. And for Greater Sydney, another 343 cases and more lives lost.
Tragically, there were 3 deaths related to the Delta strain overnight. None of the 3 were vaccinated.
And growing concern the government is no closer to bringing this crisis under control.
Aren't you exposing kids to this virus because they are getting Delta?
Quite the contrary.
Dr. Chair.
I'm sorry, what are you waiting for to pull the trigger and impose more restrictions, like a ring of steel, like a curfew? What is it going to take?
If the health advice suggested to us there was further we needed to do, of course we would do that.
But exactly what health advice was given to the government and when was the subject of a parliamentary inquiry in Sydney today. Detailed answers were thin on the ground.
I had a very specific question, which was, on what date did the public health team start preparing advice in relation to locking down parts of Sydney?
Well, it's not that easy, Ms Sharp. I mean, I know you haven't been the health minister, but when you're in the middle of a COVID crisis, you might remember...
The question was put to Dr Chant, and if you would allow Dr Chant to answer.
I will answer the question that I'm now talking about, thank you. I mean, not up to you to determine who's going to answer the questions. I'm the minister, and I'll answer it.
But the state's health officer did give a date.
On the 25th, on that day, the government responded to our initial request for lockdown.
But when pressed to provide documents with hard dates...
Dr Chan is under oath and she's given you the evidence, which is quite clear, so she won't be providing any documents.
And after that terse exchange, we're catching up with epidemiologist Professor Tony Blakely, who also fronted the inquiry in Sydney today. Tony, I trust it went a little bit more calmly for you. Let's start with this admission, really, from the Chief Health Officer that the public health team waited 9 days from the first case to recommend a lockdown. So it seems if they went too late, it's on the public health team, from what we know. Is it defensible for them to have waited that long, do you think?
In retrospect, no. And even at the time, no. The numbers were getting too high. Given what we knew then about Delta, there should have been action earlier. However, the advice that Kerry Chant gave, we don't know what it was. Because if you look at what happened in Sydney, it took a month after the 18th of June, not the 26th of June, to actually have a lockdown that looked like a lockdown. Because if you recall, we had lingerie stores still open, we had fast food courts still open, all the rest of it. What I think is actually more interesting is to know whether Dr. Chant recommended that type of find your own way lockdown where you decide who's an essential worker yourself, or a more strict lockdown that took a month to put in place.
Tony, it seems that every step of the way, Gladys Berejiklian says she's following the health advice. Almost every second question, that's what she's answering. We're following the health advice. So at what point should we start questioning the health advice she's being given?
Well, OK, there's a number of things in here. Let's unpack it. First of all, it's not just the health advice that matters. Politicians have the right, they're our representatives in Parliament, to filter that and think about other things like the societal impacts of lockdown. So they should be saying we considered the health advice, not that we followed it. And the second part is we actually don't know what that health advice was, because I suspect, as I just said, that the advice from Kerry Chant on the 26th of June was probably for a quite strict lockdown, but that took another 3 weeks to happen.
At one point, Gladys Berejiklian talked about easing restrictions in Sydney. I think it was once a 50% vaccination level is here. Today at the inquiry, Brad Hazzard said that number was only given to provide hope. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I find this difficult because I actually, on the one hand, I can share empathy with Brad, and on the other hand, I think, come on. We do need some carrots, though. So at 50% double dose adults, I think it's appropriate to give some sort of societal reward. And it might not be much because we still may not have turned the curve on the numbers by then. But, you know, getting kids back into school wouldn't be a bad type of thing to do. But getting kids back into school, opening up construction, opening up retail would be absolutely bonkers at 50% because it would go off. So 50% will hopefully see some small rewards at that point. But the substantive opening up is only going to happen at 70 and 80%, I hope and believe.
Tony, the Premier keeps getting asked about the ring of steel, and she says it's not the right option for the Delta variant. But I don't get it. If Delta is so much worse, why would we do less to stop it?
Well, I agree with you, and it's actually a logical statement. Because if Delta is that much more effective, which it is, then you actually want to do more to keep it in one region. So the fact that New South Wales is allowing this to jump out into the regions, and we've seen that a lot in the last couple of days, it just further threatens the rest of the country with incursions. We actually need to keep it in Sydney as much as we can while they bridge over to October, November, and protect the rest of the country, both for our social sanity, but also to keep the rest of the economy going without us all being dragged down.
Tony, thank you very much once again for your insight.
Pleasure. I hope that was useful.
From expert opinions to in-depth analysis and reporting, the Project YouTube brings you the biggest stories from Australia and around the globe. Hit the subscribe button now for news delivered straight to your feed.